Chelsea 3, Cardiff 1, and we are through to the semi-final of the Carabao Cup. And albeit a decidedly mixed performance, Enzo Maresca came out on top after his pointed comments in the press. Welcome, Blue Believers, to another episode of the Stamford Sync, where we are syncing up with everything Chelsea FC. And today we're talking about Chelsea 3, Cardiff 1. So I actually did a live stream for this game, and in the first half, I was kind of regretting it because it was one of the most boring first halves of football I've ever seen, and ultimately it was worrying for the first half, do you know what I mean? So the starting lineup was highly rotated, as you would expect, with Philip Jorgensen in goal, Josh Achiampong at right back, a centre-back pairing of Benoit Badiashile and Tosin Adarabioyo, Yoro Hato playing at left back, a midfield pivot of Moises Caicedo and Andre Santos, Facundo Buonanotte in the centre of attack, Jamie Gittins on the left, Tyreek George on the right, and Mark Gue up top. So looking at the lineup, it was a bit like, oh dear, do you know what I mean? Because one thing I was worried about was we've seen Maresca tank cups before last season, and this lineup didn't exactly scream I want to win this game. A few inclusions I was particularly concerned about were Philip Jorgensen, being that recently there's been a lot saying that he's come out saying that he wants to leave and is his head going to be in the game. Ultimately, he had a reasonably good performance, so that one paid out okay. But having Philip Jorgensen in goal and Tosin Adarabioyo in defence was like, oh dear. Also, I found the inclusion of Tyreek George on the right wing to be a bit unusual, being that he has supposedly also come out recently saying that he would like to leave in January because he's not getting enough playing time. And again, albeit he had a reasonably good performance in the first half until he was hooked, still felt it was unusual. Now, the big question that was on everyone's lips, because it wasn't talked about in the press conference, was where is Esteval Willian? And it was that was a worry as well, wasn't it? Because of after all of this stuff that's happened recently, to not pick Esteval Willian in this game was a bit like, what's going on? So as it turns out, afterwards, Maresca has come out and said that Esteval Willian is suffering a minor muscle issue at the moment. And not only did he not feature in yesterday's game, he also probably won't be available for the Newcastle game on Saturday either. So that makes sense why Tyreek George was included, for instance. Do you know what I mean? Because I was like, I've got this feeling that Tyreek George, he hadn't played for weeks either, by the way, like a really long time. This is the first time we've seen Tyreek George in a while. The last we'd heard about him is he'd come out saying that he wants to leave. There was links with Leeds and, potentially going, for Fulham again, coming back in for him. And I was like, why is Tyreek George getting the start and where's Esteval Willian? But Esteval Willian injured, makes sense to put Tyreek George in. So the game, the first half, man, the first half was concerning. It was one of the most dull halves of football I've ever seen before. And in the same way we made Leeds look like Real Madrid when we played them, we were making Cardiff look like Barcelona, man. Yes, they are top of their league, but they are a League One team. They were passing it really comfortably around us, man. For the first half, the possession stats were actually fairly even. I think we had 52% to their 48. And they had the better opportunities as well. At the end of the first half, they'd had 6 shots, 2 on target, and we'd had 2 shots, 1 on target. So our attack just looked so flat in the first half, man. And the fouls was crazy. Our tactics for the first half were long balls and foul opposition. That was all that was happening. 7 fouls in the first half, man, 7 fouls. And every single time a Tosin or Philip Jorgensen put a long ball out over to the top of one of the wingers, the instant the wingers were trying to get the ball, they were fouling the opposing fullbacks. It was crazy, man. It was crazy. So what I have to do is absolutely give Cardiff credit. We'll move into the second half in just in a moment, but I have to give Cardiff credit for this game, man. They played really, really well. It is evident to see why they're doing so well in the league at the moment, and their situation is actually a bit more interesting than I initially realised. So their manager, Barry something, can't remember his second name, he is another sort of Pep disciple. He actually replaced Enzo Maresca as the development coach at Man City when Maresca went to Leicester. So he is part of that Man City setup, and it shows because one of the stats that kept getting put up on the screen I thought was really interesting is of the top 4 leagues, so Premier League, Championship, League 1 and League 2, Cardiff have the highest average possession stats of any team across the entire top 4 tiers of English football. So he's another Pep disciple, and ultimately you can see that, man. Not only, they in the first half in particular, they had a lot of possession, they were playing their game, they were having shots, they were tearing us apart, man. to be completely honest. And even though, yeah, it's one of them, innit? They're doing really, really well, and we shouldn't underestimate them. But at the same time, for us to have played so badly in that first half was not good. So for me, there were only 2 players in the first half that came out with any sort of flowers, right? Josh Achiampong looked brilliant again yesterday, and the most exciting part as a Chelsea fan of watching that half for me was watching the battle between Josh Achiampong and their left winger Davies on that left side. They were going at it, and Josh Achiampong was normally coming out on top, which again makes sense because later in the game the left winger from Cardiff got hooked. Other than that, Tyreek George put a couple of crosses in, and Mark Gue one time shot it straight at the keeper. So literally our attack was so bad, man. Jamie Gittins was pretty poor in particular, and that doesn't look good for him, man. It doesn't look good for him, and potentially looks even worse for him when we get into the rest of the game, right? So moving into the second half, I was obviously doing a live stream myself, and the guys on the live stream, we were all like, at least one change needs to happen here, doesn't it? Because we have just looked absolutely flat, and we have barely threatened them at all, and they are threatening us quite a lot. And lo and behold, some changes happened. So Mark Gue and Tyreek George were both posthumously hooked and replaced by João Pedro and Alejandro Garnacho, with Jamie Gittins moving over to the right. And it worked, man. It worked. João Pedro didn't have an amazing game, but ultimately started, being a bit more of a focal point than Mark Gue was, and because of his ability to do little 1-2s and drop deep, all of a sudden our play started looking a lot better. Another player who didn't look particularly good in the first half, and I thought might have been the one to go, was Facundo Buonanotte. Started in the centre of attack, but ultimately, with a few extra, much better players around him, he started looking a lot better too. So ultimately, we got the first goal. Alejandro Garnacho, wicked. Really happy for Alejandro Garnacho in this game in general, because he got a really rough time after the Everton game for missing those chances. But kind of as we saw today, my opinion on that was like, he's getting the chances. So the next step is to calm it down and start putting those goals away. And that's what he did today, albeit against League One opposition. But you can only beat what's in front of you. So after Alejandro Garnacho's opening goal, Cardiff then scored, and it was 1-1, and it was starting to worry, man. I was starting to worry. I was just like, oh no, we've got literally first teamers on, and we still are really, really struggling against this team. Again, loads of credit to Cardiff for how well they played in this game. A few more changes were made, and obviously the most important one was Pedro Neto, who came on and scored the winning goal. Pedro Neto now the top scorer in the club. And right towards the end of the game, Garnacho got himself another goal, and also Facundo Buonanotte got himself an assist. So ultimately, it was 3-1, which is, for the result, that's kind of the result you look at and you're like, yeah, okay, Chelsea should be beating Cardiff 3-1, but it didn't feel like a 3-1. Do you know what I mean? It really took a lot of, changes and putting most of our first team on in order to get us over this hump that we were struggling with in this game. Alejandro Garnacho, like I say, I want to give him loads and loads and loads of credit, because he was lambasted quite heavily for missing a lot of chances. A lot of Chelsea fans are not really happy with him after the Everton game, but for me, I saw that as a step in his development. He's got 2 goals in this game now, which is absolutely great, and if he can use this momentum and carry it on into the Newcastle game, we might now be seeing the unlocking of Alejandro Garnacho as a player who can start more consistently contributing to the team. So yeah, other notable performances, like I mentioned earlier, Philip Jorgensen actually had a reasonably good game. Still nowhere near good enough to be thinking about pushing Robert Sanchez, and I do still expect to see him go. But if we're, if we're going to keep Philip Jorgensen around, it'd be interesting to see what happens in January. I imagine he might get starts against the likes of Paphos in the Champions League and Charlton Athletic in our first FA Cup game of the season. Tosin Adarabioyo had another reasonably forgettable performance, to be honest, and I think at this point his confidence is just shot. He wasn't terrible to the point like he was in the Leeds game, but also he's just not looking like an assured centre-back at all, and he got the full 90 minutes. Josh Achiampong was hooked for Trevor Chalobah later in the game, and Tosin Adarabioyo saw the game out, but ultimately not looking good for Tosin at the moment. Facundo Buonanotte, kind of mentioned it already, awful first half. Like, every single time he got the ball, he lost it, and he just kept getting dispossessed and intercepted and making wayward passes that were going to the opposition and stuff. But ultimately, what happened is when we brought on the likes of João Pedro, Garnacho and Pedro Neto, he looked a lot better. So I was quite harsh on him in the first half, thinking he's probably the one that needs to go. But ultimately, what happened is as soon as he had some quality around him, his performance stepped up. Again, not 100% sure that, we should keep him around. I've really got no idea what's going to happen in January at this point. Obviously, all the noise is saying we're not going to make any major changes, but I could still see him going back to Brighton at this point because he's not playing very much either. And like I say, the big story of this one for me is the Garnacho stuff, because even up until as recently as the end of the Everton game, people were still sort of having the conversation about Garnacho versus Jamie Gittins, right? Does Jamie Gittins look better? Jamie Gittins has done quite well in terms of assists, but ultimately he just looks like he struggles to get into games a lot more than Garnacho does. And yesterday just absolutely proved it, man. The same position, he had 45 minutes on the left. Garnacho had 45 minutes on the left. Also, Jamie Gittins struggled to beat his man, struggled to get involved in the game, didn't look confident, didn't look assured. Garnacho came on and he looked hungry and he looked like he wanted it, and ultimately was rewarded with 2 goals for his trouble. So I think that kind of cleanly at the moment puts to bed the question of Jamie Gittins versus Alejandro Garnacho. Alejandro Garnacho is going to be our starting left winger in our big games. That is just kind of certain now. And obviously with Esteval being out, Pedro Neto is definitely going to get in on the right against Newcastle. And if you see anyone else apart from Garnacho on the left, then there are going to be questions asked. And Maresca was all kisses to the fans at the end of the game. This is a really strange one, man. I'm finding this thing, it might actually be a bit of a little masterstroke from Maresca. I have been quite honest in live streams and on videos. I don't really love the way that Maresca has handled this stuff in the press. I see it as being a little bit petty and a bit petulant. But ultimately, what has happened is he has garnered the respect of the majority of the Chelsea fan base by essentially pitting himself against the owners. And ultimately, as much as a lot of us don't like Maresca, there are just as many of us that aren't happy with the current model. And players that are being bought, all 16-year-olds from around the world and whatever, the model isn't really very popular with Chelsea fans at the moment. And what Maresca seems to have done is won himself a lot of new fans or more fans, or he's kind of got people over the line, because it feels like only a few weeks ago I was starting to see Maresca out, do you know what I mean? And that's the thing, and I've never been that, do you know what I mean? I absolutely 100% think that we need to stick with a manager and we do need to support him. And personally, I don't think the way to do that for a manager, a Chelsea manager, is to come out in the press and vaguely moan at the sporting directors. Do you know what I mean? He kind of created this us versus them mentality, but for the time being, he's definitely got the fans on side at least. So it will be interesting to see how it plays out. Ultimately, I don't actually think any of this really matters, which is another reason why I was annoyed that he did it in the first place, because the truth of the fact is, if he doesn't get results, then his job's going to be under pressure. If he carries on, like, we've got now 2 wins in 8 games, do you know what I mean? Or 7 games, but we didn't win in 5 games before that. If we don't win another game up until January into the Man City game, then we're going to be here again, aren't we? It's not really, Maresca might have bought himself a bit of love from the fans and a bit of time, but at the end of the day, the thing he absolutely needs to do for me is just do his talking on the pitch, man. Just do his talking on the pitch. And yesterday, one of the criticisms that we give Maresca in general is decision-making, right? At the end of the day, he put out a heavily rotated team. It didn't work. So at half-time, he made decisions to swap people out, and he showed that he wanted to win the game. He's definitely not going to tank this cup this season, at least. 100% you can see that. There's only 2 games away left from the final, so 100%, he could have himself a 3rd trophy in 2 seasons, which ultimately will only strengthen his position. But that's the thing, man. That's kind of my 2 cents on the whole thing in a nutshell. I don't care what Maresca's got to say in the press. I don't think it's becoming for a Chelsea manager to come out and moan about the owners, or, if he's not getting support or whatever. I'm like, mate, show them that they should support you by doing what you're doing in the last 2 games. Get results on the pitch. That is the only thing that is ultimately going to make the difference, because you can come out and moan about the owners, but if you're losing games and you're making crazy decisions and you're putting fullbacks in the number 10 spot when we're chasing a game like he did in Atalanta, do you know what I mean? It doesn't matter what you say in the press. It doesn't matter how much the fans love you if you're losing games at the end of the day. So look, at the end of the day, I'm happy we won, and I'm happy we got the win against Everton, and I want to see that momentum carried on into what is now a really tough run of fixtures, man. We got Newcastle, we got Aston Villa, we've got Bournemouth, we've got Paphos coming up at some point. That's our next Champions League game. We've got Man City at the start of January. Do you know what I mean? This is a really, really tough run of fixtures we're just about to go into now, and win as many of those games as you can. That's all I want as a fan at the end of the day. Look, loads of people aren't happy with the ownership, but the truth of the fact is, they're not going to go anywhere, are they? Not only have they invested billions into Chelsea and several millions every single season in signings and their recruitment or whatever, they've also bought other clubs. They've bought Strasbourg. We're talking about buying Santos and going out and getting a South American team and growing this thing. Like, we can moan at the owners all we want, and this isn't about supporting the owners. This is just about the dead truth that ultimately they're massively investing into this project, and one way or the other, they ain't going anywhere, man. So, as far as I'm concerned, any manager that wants to do well has to just do it on the pitch at the end of the day, because the owners will only react to results, right? So they won't think about changing their model unless they've got a manager, which they have with Maresca at the moment, that is winning a lot and getting trophies and stuff, and falling at the last moment because he lacks experience. That takes time for that thing to build up, man. Coming out and moaning about it once in the press isn't going to make a huge amount of difference. I reiterate one more time, do your talking on the pitch, man. And that's all I want to see. And at the end of the day, we saw that in Cardiff yesterday, and he made the right substitutions at the right moments in order to get us over the line. So fair play, credit to Maresca for that 100%. So that's it, guys. That's my review of the Cardiff game. Ultimately, like I say, it was a game of two halves. It was, the first half was god awful. It was really, really, really bad. And it's concerning in itself if our depth isn't strong enough to get involved in a game against League One opposition, then that's a little bit of a worry itself. But ultimately, we do have a big squad. People are coming back. Do you know what I mean? I think injuries are obviously a massive part of that. The Liam Delap situation, he definitely would have played yesterday. Do you know what I mean? Had he have been available, he definitely would have played yesterday. I don't really think we can blame the recruitment for that, because we were supposed to have more striking options than we've got, and we're only relying on Mark Yu because Liam Delap keeps getting injured. So again, I think it'll be interesting to see what happens in January, man, and it will tell us how much the owners want to get out of this season. If we get, for instance, there's a lot of talk about Thiago Silva at the moment. Thiago Silva is making himself available for European clubs. His kids just signed his first professional contract at Chelsea. His family live in London. It 100% makes sense. John Terry come out and said it really, really, really well, actually. He was like, when I was in the squad for Antonio Conte's title-winning season, I wasn't playing, but I had a really important role to play in the dressing room. And also, another really interesting thing about Thiago Silva is that he wants to be a coach. He came out the other day and said his goal in his coaching career will be to coach every single team that he's played for, which is, that would be an amazing kind of thing for him, wouldn't it? PSG, AC Milan, Chelsea, and Fluminense, evidently. Be really, really good if Thiago Silva could manage that. And ultimately, having someone like him who is available to play the odd game, the younger guys can learn from him, and they will learn from him much more because he's going in with a coaching mentality, because ultimately that's what he wants. So if we make signings like that in January, and maybe a striker to give João Pedro some support, Liam Delap is not only going to be out injured for a while, his development is being curtailed. So every single time we're asking Liam Delap to play, we're asking him to develop, whereas at the moment he should have had half a season to develop and get to the point where he's pushing for that striker spot on a first team basis. But because he's missed so much time, obviously we're not seeing that. So maybe a striker is going to be, talked about. For me, that is definitely something we could look at. The midfield as well, maybe a little bit of a situation that needs looking at, albeit Maresca does seem happy to throw fullbacks in there quite a lot. So we'll have to see how it develops. But either way, guys, that is what I've got to say about that. Thanks for sticking around until the end of the video. If you did, and I will catch up with you very, very soon. Take it easy. Peace.